Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan, out the Motor City Madmouth, and I am joined by my Monday co-host, George Eichhorn. And again, George Eichhorn has been a host with me for the last 40 years anyway, so what's the difference? But we all Monday night.
Hey, Scott.
Glad to have you. And we want to welcome Graham Farrell to the broadcast. Graham, how are you? Graham, why don't you
I'm doing good. Glad to be here.
Why don't you let everybody know what you represent early, and then you get to do it in more detail.
Cool. Well, I was a former sports writer. I help run a day-to-day for a sports website that helps college kids, kind of create a platform and get their writing out there. And I also run a Twitter page called Connecting Sports Writers and Podcasters, which helps sports writers all over the world get connected with websites, and in turn, get them jobs and run ads for people.
My goodness, that's unbelievable. You know what amazed me about you, and it was just refreshing. You've joined Twitter since April of 2018, and you're following 7,948 the last I looked, and you have 10,200 followers. That to me is Graham, is extremely impressive. How do you do it?
Well, at first it started off as kind of like a follow train almost thing, where I wanted to get sports people, the ability to get more followers and be able to build their platform with other sports fans. And eventually it started working like a well-oiled machine. When I post a tweet, I'd gain followers. And then eventually organic following comes. And once organic following happens, you get followers without following other people. And, just kind of kept growing. And I'm hoping to keep growing it throughout the next couple of years, just to see how many other people I can connect. And, it's always a beautiful thing seeing people get jobs and people coming to you and saying, hey, thank you so much for the help. And I do it out of the kindness of my heart. I just like seeing people succeed in the sports industry.
So why don't you break in more detail what an organic following is?
So organic following, right? There's two types of followings, and I don't want to necessarily call it unorganic, but a pretty easy way to gain followers on Twitter is to follow people who generally like tweets or follow you or like your tweets to get them to follow you back. It doesn't have a super high success rate, but it's a great way to gain a following in the very beginning, and it's a great way to have more people interact with you to gain following, right? So that's what I would call unorganic, but it's a great way to gain followers. Organically is when people are following you without you having to follow them. So you've built a platform, you've given a reason of people to care, and they follow you just because they care and they enjoy your content. Which to me, that's the hardest thing to do, is get people to care about something they don't have a reason to care about, right? I mean, it's very hard to make a random person care, or it's very hard to make, why would that random person follow me, right? Unless they enjoy what I do, which is, hopefully people do enjoy what I do, and I'm, can continue to help people out. So,
do you find that sometimes?
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Do you find one of the things I look to try to gain followers? If you follow me, I follow back, which kind of coincides with being a man of your word or woman of your word. You know what I mean? Because I know that's how I built it early. I mean, obviously, I have only started the South Florida Tribune account just June of 2019. I got like 2,100 followers, certainly. But you have to work Twitter aggressively. But do you find that the follow backs are really useful as well?
Well, I find they're useful, but I find if someone is just following back everybody and they're not really a person specific to your, let's say, geographic where you are or your similar interest, then they might not interact with your tweets. So if you have a person that follows you, it might be good for, looking good. Like it might be, he has 2,100 followers. But how many of them are interactive? How many of those followers are going to help you push your needle? And how many of those followers are going to help you continue to grow what you're trying to grow? And that's the biggest part about an organic following. It's those people who are following you organically are interacting with you constantly. So those interactions help create more interactions because other people see the interactions and then they interact. And that's kind of how Twitter and Instagram, that's how everybody works with organic following. And that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Is to build an organic following and get the interactions that you want.
Go ahead, George. This is interesting. Interactions. So how do you get those interactions? I'm just curious.
Well, people do in various ways. Think of a major media website that, say a political website, right? Well, they put out a headline that's so, everybody knows CNN, Fox, opposite is the spectrum. Well, what they do is they twist a headline, right? So both of them have different headlines for the same story, different headlines, right? but it's all about the headline. So when someone sees the headline, they may not read the story, but they interact. They're tweeting, they're liking, they're favoriting, they're commenting. They're doing everything to do to interact with that specific tweet. So it's the same thing. If you have a hot take on Twitter, if you have an opinion, if you have something you think people might agree with, might disagree with, if you ask a question, then people are more in tune to interact with your tweet. And that's the hardest part, is to get people to care and to get people to interact with your tweets. Because Twitter interaction is how you grow your brand. The more people that see it, the more people that are interacting, the more interesting your tweets have to be, which is why a lot of major companies hire social media managers to manage their accounts, to manage their Twitters, so they can grow, so they can get the interactions.
Social media managers, really?
Oh yeah, we at Student Union we had a social media manager a couple years ago, and I'm not as hands-on as I used to be with the website, but I still help recruit and stuff like that, and I interact with everybody on the website daily. But we had a social media manager for a while who would there's certain times where articles will do better, certain times of the day, right? So we would schedule these articles to go out at certain times. We'd have a person scheduling our tweets to go out at a specific time, because timing of the day matters with everything. Instagram posts, the more interactions at a certain time for Instagram, you might get more likes. Certain times for a tweet to go out will get more likes. Think of a sporting event, right? The Bucks and Heat game is on right now. Okay. If you're tweeting about the Bucks and Heat right now, and you use any kind of hashtag that has anything to do with the game, well, then you're more likely to get people interacting and watching that live game with you, and more people are going to interact and talk with you on your tweet, which eventually more people see. You get these random interactions, and then you get maybe people following you because you have similar interests.
Go ahead, George.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed is that to grow into the field of sports writing nowadays, you really got to be good at Twitter and all of the social media. I'll give you an example. Scott and I, when we were growing up and as sports writers, we basically had a spot to ourselves in the press box, and we could follow along with a notepad or, bring our little trusty microphone with us to do an interview afterwards. Of course, then it transformed into bringing your laptop or your iPad. But even that, the days are gone where a sports writer sits there behind the computer and just starts, working on his game story, for example, because now the demands are so great to get these tweets out there, to get the social media out there, that these writers now have become multidimensional. Many of them are not only doing the tweets at the game and writing the game story, but then some of them are even going on like a live stream afterwards, such as the Detroit Free Press or Detroit News does with their columnist and their beat reporter, for example. And I just wanted to know, Graham, is that something that those kind of skills and talents, is that something that they're teaching these kids in journalism school? Or how do you become all in one, such a master at, shall we say, sports reporting?
Well, I think it's really learned. I think that's kind of, I won't want to say an untapped market, but a lot of people don't really understand how to work social media. They're going through it without really understanding what it is. So these people that are doing these live streams, these live videos, or, post-game wrap-up speech, well, you get people watching. Periscope is a great way to gain followers, but they don't teach it anywhere. Everything I learned, I pretty much learned from myself. When I first did my podcast like 5 years ago, I learned, when I first started, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And, a year or two in, I realized certain things to do to get more interactions. And then I collabed with Student Union Sports. And when I collabed with Student Union Sports, I learned a lot from the guys that helped run it over there. And over the years, we had summits where our best writers and best contributors would get together in big cities, and we would talk it over. And those meetings between sports writers and people all over the country would get together, and from our website, and it really taught me a lot. Like, we had some guys we had a guy that was with Barstool, we had a guy that was with SEC Network, and let's see, we had some other guys, I'm trying to think where they were from, but they all worked for Student Union at the time. But everybody had kind of a different approach to it, and it's all pretty similar in the end, but it's all stuff that's great to learn about social media. I mean, I'd love to give a class on it, just to, help people out. Say in your situation, if you don't know how to use social media, I'd love to help you out. I'd love to sit down for an hour and just show you a couple things that can help grow your platform and help grow your brand.
That's a good idea, yeah. And that's a great talent and a great service that you can provide for a fee, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I would love to, eventually make money off doing something like that, but just starting out, I'd just love to get a class to people hear me speak and to get my word out and just really to help people out. That's why I started connecting sports writers, was to see a positive change. And Twitter can get pretty negative sometimes, and I'm not a fan of the negativity. And I think when there's a positive spin on things, like giving a free class or helping people get jobs or connecting writers, that turns into a super positive thing, and you feel like you're doing something good. And that's kind of how I felt, was that I was helping people out, doing a good thing for free at the time.
So as a rule of thought, when would you say the best time is to put tweets up or put anything on social media? Is there a particular time which is usually more recommended than others?
All right, so think of it like this. When do you think people are off work, sitting at home, at the average time a person gets off work is 4:30 to 6 o'clock, right? So that person's probably sitting at home around 7 to 8. I would say 7 to 8, 7 to 8:30 is probably prime time to get something out there, because that's really, when people are looking at their phones, 7 to 9 even. I find Sunday nights works really well. So that Sunday night slot when everybody's kind of around the TV, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, maybe 7 even, right before Sunday night football starts, that's a really good time to post stuff. It really depends on the day too. Saturday, let's say Saturday you post a tweet. Like for me, I help run that account, the Student Union Sports, and we recruit college kids. And on a Saturday night, you get people that message you at 3 a.m, who are all going to be the next Danny Cannell or Clay Travis or a big sports personality. You get these people that want to do that at 3 a.m. Well, you don't want someone hitting you up at 3 a.m. because that's probably the alcohol talking, right? And it happens all the time. It's crazy that we get people that message us and ask if they could come write for us. We say yes, and then it's like they never respond again because they got some liquid courage. It never happened. So Saturdays have always been kind of hit or miss. You want to do it earlier because people are probably drinking a little bit during the day because there's no responsibilities at night or the next day. So Saturdays kind of almost a limbo time for me really to post stuff. But whenever a sport is live, like live sports, tweeting during a live sport is huge for interactions. And that's the best time to tweet. If you're tweeting an article, obviously, if you're tweeting an article during a sports game, that's probably not going to happen because you're going to get an article out after the event is over. But let's just say, I'm a huge UFC fan, an MMA fan. So when UFC's on, I'm constantly watching, and I'm constantly tweeting my scores, how I score rounds, who I think's winning, if someone gets robbed of a decision, what's next for a fighter, and that gets interactions because people are seeing the tweets, people are interacting with it because what are they thinking? What is their thought process while they're watching that? And they see a tweet, it's like, oh, I was thinking that too. I wonder what he's going to do next. Oh, I agree. That guy was robbed of a judge's scorecard. Things like that. Like anytime a live sporting event is going on, tweeting during that time is the best time for interactions.
Really? So you're saying from 4:30 to 6 usually is a good time? 4:30 6 when they get home from work?
Well, me personally, I think when you're getting home from work and you're sitting down, your day's kind of over at 7 or 8 o'clock, I would say that's a really good time. Obviously during lunch hours too, like 12 to 2, those are good times because people are on their phones. You want to tweet an article at a time when you believe most people are on their phones, so that's when most eyes are going to see it, right? So whenever you think is a good time when people are on their phones is when you want to tweet it out. That's to me, that makes the most sense, and that's how we did it for years. And I'm not saying it worked perfectly, nothing's perfect, but it did get more interactions when we tweeted it at a better time.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, is there a point where you've got to be cautious about the word overkill? For example, even at a baseball game, do I really need to know what every pitch was? No, of course not. But in a situation like if the team has obviously got a great following or the writer has a great following, he's probably going to talk about so-and-so making a good play or so-and-so coming up with a clutch hit. Is there any rule of thumb, though, for a guy that's or lady that's covering a major sporting event such as, MLB, NBA, NFL, or NHL, how often they should tweet during a game?
I don't think there's a rule of thumb. I mean, I see certain sports writers, they tweet hundreds of times a game, right? Or they tweet 2 times a game. I mean, that's kind of a personal opinion, how you go about growing your brand. I mean, sometimes if you tweet 100 times, people are like, I don't want to follow that person because they're tweeting 100 times a game, and that could be kind of come off as annoying. Also, probably going to get more interactions that way. So it really just depends. I mean, I look at it from a sales aspect. I have no fear of rejection. I don't really super care what people think. That's how I make money. And so it's just really kind of a personal thing. I mean, obviously, every single pitch, you probably don't really care about every single pitch, but there are people out there who do, right, who can't watch the game. They're looking at their phones on Twitter who are like, oh, this guy's helping me out. George is helping me out. Scott's helping me out. I'm seeing these live reactions. So there's no real rule of thumb. There's no unwritten rules. That's just kind of how you want to grow your personal brand.
So when you talk about potentially finding followers, okay, do you find them when you're tagging off the wall people, like, for example, at Detroit Lions fans, and then you throw a bunch of them out there and you're hoping that some of them stick? Is that the type of thing that a lot of people try to do? Just throw it out there and see what happens to pick up people?
Well, I would say replying to, not famous people per se, but people who are, I guess famous tweets, like famous writers, anybody with a blue verified check mark. The more you reply to those tweets, the more interactions. You want to follow people who are replying to those tweets. You want to follow the people who have similar interests as you, who are liking those tweets. So if you're a Lions fan or you're a Lions writer and you want to get big or you want to grow a brand, you need to go on other beat writers' posts, on other Lions fans, find them, follow them. If you get a follow back, follow who's liking their tweets. Follow anybody that's liking Detroit Lions stuff, right? And if they don't follow you back, well, you can go and follow them 3 or 4 days later, because Twitter does have a following limit now. But at the same time, if you're reaching to one demographic, then the Lions is how you want to grow. And I'm not saying this is how you want to grow. Right. If you were a Detroit Lions writer back in the day, or a Detroit writer, and that specific demographic is perfect for interactions. The more Detroit fans you have, the more Detroit people you have, the more they're going to interact and like tweets, either agree with you, disagree with you, or just simply enjoy the tweet. So I just found over the years that's the best way to get interactions. Like I was a Clemson writer, right? So I would follow all these other people interacting with Clemson writers' tweets. And then, a year in, I've gained like 300 or 400 Clemson fans who are following me, and they're liking my tweets, they're interacting with them, and it makes a tweet go viral a little bit easier when you have a lot of interactions, like off the bat. Like, say I tweeted, Trevor Lawrence, I think he has a ceiling to be, I don't think he has a ceiling, right? There's no ceiling for Trevor Lawrence. This guy is my potential first pick overall. I don't have comparison because his footwork's so good. Just kind of a crazy take about Trevor Lawrence. Well, boom, you get 6 Clemson fans immediately who are like, yep, like. You get a Carolina fan who's quoting it, and he's like, I don't like this. This is stupid. The more interactions, the better. People are always going to hate you on Twitter. Not hate you per se, but not agree with your tweet. And a rival fan base like South Carolina and Clemson, that's just one example. But when a South Carolina fan gets a hold of your tweet, that'll also do some damage, right? So it works both ways.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've actually been trying to figure these things out on the fly. Graham, you're right. There's a lot of stuff you have to find on the fly. So if I think, for example, I have a pretty interesting thing about the San Diego Padres, I'll start looking at San Diego Padres fans, and then tag 5 or 10 of them, hoping that maybe I'll generate some interest that way, depending on what you're doing, as well as the articles I get from a lot of the media distribution partners. So therefore, it's like target following, isn't it, for the most part? There, you're narrowing it down to them. And again, it all is about the numbers game anyways, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a numbers game at the end of the day, but it's more important about the followers you have. I would say it's quality over quantity.
Okay.
Just because you would rather have 500 followers who are interacting with you than 5,000 who it looks good, but they're not interacting with you. So you're getting 2 likes a tweet rather than if you have 500, you're getting 10 likes a tweet because they agree with you and they care about what you care about. So I think it's quality over quantity, to be honest with you. But also, the more quantity you have sometimes, the more likely it is you may go viral and catch a couple of those eyes. Really just depends.
So when you look at interactions, it's one thing, what you want to get, but then you want to have quality interaction. So you can break it down in two ways, isn't that?
I mean, yeah, well, I don't really kind of see a difference between quality interactions and quantity interactions. I would say the more interactions, the better. I think following wise, you'd rather have quality followers over quantity followers. You were talking about bot tagging followers earlier, and I don't really do that. Like, I don't tag people in the tweets. I'll just, like a tweet of theirs. And then if they're a Padres fan, they can see, they might click on your profile and they might follow you back. But once again, you kind of have to give them a reason to follow you back, right? Like, so if you have good tweets or you're tweeting about something they like, then it makes sense for them to follow you. Student Union's thing was college football, and they had humor to them. So people who liked college football or college basketball, who also had a decent sense of humor, would probably give them a follow if they clicked on their page. Getting the people to click on your page is huge. What are you about and what separates yourself, right? You have experience. You've both been in the industry for years. You've worked together for 40 years. So that's what separates you, right? Not a lot of blogs have that much of experience.
Right. Go ahead, George. And by the way, before you...
I was going to say, as far as the teams go, of course, they put their own spin on everything that they want you to read. Do you find most people, Graham, are cultivating to the team websites as opposed to something like the fandom? I would say websites, or not websites, but pages on Twitter, for example. A Tiger, there could be 50 or 100 different Tiger fandom type of tweeters out there, and would an average fan, do you think, still follow the team website where they know they're not going to get anything but rosy PR stuff from the team, as opposed to following one of the fandom sites?
Yeah, I would say they probably mostly follow the fandom sites or like branched off sites. I mean, really, Twitter is the best place to talk and have conversation and communicate. But here's an instance that to me is way different. Is when I interned for Tiger Illustrated years ago. Well, years ago, 2-3 years ago. But they are not really big on Twitter. They have a fan base the Clemson fans that are off Twitter on Rivals website, and they have about like 20 or 30,000 active people on their board, like at all times, which is crazy to me because they never really picked up social media. I mean, they tweet out their articles, but to me, it's about not hot takes, but you'd rather get a writer explaining his point of view or his personal opinion rather than just X's and O's, right? Like there's certainly still people that care about X's and O's, what the final score was, and a game recap. But people want to know what you think. Why do you think that? What's your hot take? Give me a hot take. And it's sports writing has changed to a take game, right? If you have a good take, if you have a bad take, if you have a hot take, a cold take, it's all about what take you have and how you look at something instead of, here's what happened during the game. Here's a game wrap up. Game wrap ups have, I don't want to say died off completely, but they're not as popular as they once were. And I think the more interactions come with, someone having an opinion piece. Opinion pieces are the craze right now.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
I know exactly what you're saying. And I think that for the most part, at least in the metropolitan Detroit area, they do pretty good. I mean, we've got a good balance of the fandom site, as you mentioned, and of course the teams are doing their own stuff. They have people that are at the games and tweeting all the time and that sort of thing, like you said, for the X's and O's. But I think you're right on target. I think most people would like to get the opinions of a knowledgeable writer or a broadcaster or a tweeter, if you will. And I think for the most part, too, that this area has really, really taken off. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, Scott and I, when we were doing the Sports Exchange back in the 1970s and 80s, I mean, my God, we didn't see anything like this, did we, Scott?
No, are you kidding? Who would have thunk that? I mean, it just goes to show you. We didn't. I'll tell you what, many years ago, I actually wrote a story for the South Florida Tribune that'll be up there later. Who would have thought, Graham, that terrestrial radio, internet radio, now podcasting? I mean, in terms of the progression of how these mediums have really gone on. I mean, does anybody in this day and age know what FCC stands for? Federal Communications Commission? I don't know, but I know George and I lived and died by it, and we had to make sure that whatever we said on the air, we didn't say anything that could get us in trouble and lead to some hefty fines. That's for sure. So, I mean, it's just...
Yeah, and also, Scott, I remember having to apply for my license. I remember we had to get our own broadcast license.
Yep.
They sent us a little card in the mail,
Yep.
and we got our card laminated that you were officially part of the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, and but basically, like I said, I mean, I think it's great, Graham, that and what it's done, of course, is created a lot of jobs for a lot of people. I mean, some of them I know are just low paying or not paying at all, but it gives shall we say, the average Joe or Joanne a chance to vent and to update and give their opinions on what's going on, not only in the sports world, but the world at large.
Well, yeah, it gives, today's social media, even if you're writing for a site that isn't paying you, you're getting a platform, right? Like Twitter's a platform where everybody can get their opinion piece out. Everybody can say what they want on Twitter. It's a free platform with millions of users, millions of sports fans, right, who have access to saying anything. I mean, think about Kevin Durant interacting with a 21-year-old kid or a 16-year-old kid because he got under his skin. I mean, but the 16-year-old kid is hiding behind a fake name, a fake picture on Twitter, but he got under Kevin Durant, one of the most famous athletes in the world's skin, sitting in his mom's basement. I mean, it's just crazy how social media has changed the game forever. And it's beautiful that everybody has a platform now to be a writer. These websites can give you platforms to grow, right? Like back in the day, I'm sure it was way different. Like you could probably write for people, but social media is how you get it out to the world, the masses of people.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should point out, by the way, that you're listening to the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth, along with George Eichhorn and Graham Farrell. This broadcast is also being heard on No Limits. No Limits, as well as our partner broadcast of the Sports Exchange. So we're making sure that Graham Farrell's message gets out to a lot of people. And this is one of those things where everybody can talk about social media pointers and tips. And we're so thankful to have Graham on the broadcast. So just so you know, this will be is on No Limits and the Sports Exchange. So you're right, Graham, when it comes to platforms, you know, you have those now more so than you ever did.
Exactly. And sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. I mean, sometimes you have people hiding behind a screen name or a Twitter name who don't want to use their real name. You know, I mean, then that goes for everything on Twitter. People like myself who use my real name, and, you know, I want to get credit for what I wrote, right? Like I used to write funny pieces. I wrote serious pieces. I've done everything all over the internet, and everyone's always going to know that Graham Farrell did it. And I love that about it, that there is anonymity on Twitter, but you also can be yourself at all times. And it's just a beautiful way to create a platform, right? Because some people get famous from being anonymous. You know, they don't want people to know who they are, and they become famous writers, or they become famous podcasters, all behind an anonymous name. And that's just what Twitter has given us, that kind of platform.
So one of the things that I noticed too, Graham and Scott, is that especially in Detroit, and I'm sure this is the case in many other cities, we got guys that lost their radio shows in Detroit. Okay, I think of guys like Bob Page and Denny McClain and Eli Zarrett and Tom Mazaway. These guys are good sports broadcasters and have been for the years gone by. But for some reason, because of maybe their age, I don't know, maybe they ticked a few people off, who knows. But these kind of people that used to be on the airwaves in Detroit, for example, a great sports town, now find their way out to the podcast circuit. And is that something that is probably more commonplace nowadays, do you think, Graham? That, like I said, names used to be on the radio themselves. Maybe they lost their show for whatever reason. Now they find a good comfort level and a good home hosting podcasts.
I mean, yeah, I personally, and I think the podcast market is a little bit oversaturated. I think everybody kind of has a podcast now, and I think it's harder to differentiate your podcast when everybody has one. You know, like 6 or 7 years ago, podcasts were not new, but it was still kind of an untapped market, right? Now it's like everybody's check out my podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So at that point, you have to find sponsors. You have to find a way to differentiate your podcast. And that is one of the harder things to do, because there you go back to my main point. How do you make people care about something that they don't have a reason to care about?
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how you say that, because one of the things I've actually had to do, Graham, is I have certain podcasts designed for sports, so I had to get creative. And since I'm trying to deal with local businesses such as Chamber of Commerce and networking groups, I've had to go from 100% sports to probably like a 60, 40, 55, 45 split of non-sports related things so I can reach more people. Do you think that that's a very good way of doing things?
I mean, yeah, if that's what pleases your current platform and that's what's making you money right now, then yeah. I mean, if that's what's bringing in the money, I would say that, splitting that is best. But you have to, do you want your website to be a national website? Do you want it to be sports? I mean, what's your end goal for your website?
Yeah, well, one of the things we have going for us here is the South Florida Tribune is an online publication, and we use the podcasting as a separate broadcasting division, so we're able to get the best of both worlds, you know what I mean? So that way we are a multi-dimensional operation is what we've tried to do. And that's something that we really worked hard. So now that we're on the podcasting thing, Graham, what's the trick to try or gain an audience? I mean, who do you know? How do you get people to listen to it? I know you're right. This market's very oversaturated, so you have to really dig deep into your. I hate to use bag of tricks, but I will for the sake of conversation. You know what I mean? Everybody has different subscribers. Like, for example, with us, we have a lot of the main ones: Apple Podcast, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google, or wherever you get them. Was there a particular way that you grow an audience?
I mean, here it comes again, like if you're talking for an hour, why would someone want to listen to you for an hour? And that's not being facetious. That's just generally asking, like, what would make someone want to listen to you for an hour twice a week? Are you interesting? Or do you have good sports takes? Are you super knowledgeable? Are you funny? How do you get people to be interested? How do you separate yourself? It's the biggest question of them all, is to make people care. But a great way to do that is to get either on video, like a video of you doing your radio show, and post your best minute-and-a-half clip to Twitter, right? Post a clip or a video of you doing your podcast or your radio show, post it on Twitter, tag, tweet, whatever it is, give a hot take to the video, have a good headline, more people interact with it. They see you. It becomes more personal. You're no longer just the South Florida Tribune with a big T as your AV, right? Is your profile picture. You're a person. They see Scott. They see George. They see you. They hear you. They listen to you. Now you're personal, right? It's the same thing in business. If I'm in business and I'm talking to a customer, but I don't see them face to face because I'm in inside sales, and then I have a Zoom meeting with them and I get face to face, and I'm like, you're a real person. You're a real person, and it's way easier to talk to you now because I've seen your face. I understand you. I've seen your hand motions. I've seen you interact. We've had conversations face to face. So it's the same thing with a video. So if you get a video of yourself doing a podcast, you're out there. They can see you. They can interact with you. You're a real person, and they know that. You're not just another sports blog online. You're not afraid to put your face online. I mean, that's just, to me, it's a great way to get people to be more personable with you, to have a video of yourself doing it. Your best minute and a half, take a clip, make a clip of it, get it on video and post it on Twitter. Because, boom, you're a real person. You're more personable. It just works better that way.
Hey, Graham, you ever heard of the initials GMTA?
GMTA, I have not.
Well, you will tonight, so I would advise you to take notes, or I'll text it to you, okay? Because you just took the words out of my mouth. Great minds think alike. My goodness, you're the best kid, I'm telling you. You are.
Thank you.
Because here's the deal. What I'm actually planning to do now, I've become more involved with these Zoom calls by the minute, from networking or going on Marlin Zoom calls or wherever I'm allowed to do them. And what I'm actually trying to do with our thing is doing exactly what you suggested. Now that I've done the audio version of it for a long time, I want to start doing more broadcasts through my YouTube channel. And by doing so, I'm building my YouTube channel as well as trying to build put it on Facebook to do exactly what you just said, and that's become more visual. That's the next step in the process is really what it is. So that, like you say, it's about real people. But when you started mentioning that, my goodness, what is this guy? Got a crystal ball trying to read my head? Really? Good stuff, man.
Well, I'm just glad to help. But I mean, if you have a YouTube account, right, you take your best minute and a half clip, you clip that video, and you put that video on Twitter, and people see you. And it's easy. It's, YouTube is a little harder to gain followers and get people to watch it unless you have really good taglines. But it's a game changer on Twitter when you have a video of yourself. And I've noticed over the years that you just get a lot more interactions with your face because you're a real person and it's just more personable.
Well, what I'm actually doing right now, just so you know, is I'm doing these broadcasts about 35, 40 minutes tops on there because that's what Zoom allows you to do. And so I'm trying to title the broadcast, you follow me, where it becomes interesting, like you're actually watching it face to face and making it more interactive. I don't know if that's the right way to work, but I want to really get people to see the body language is what you're referring to, the facial expressions of body language, so that people realize there's more to it than just a voice. Like George and I are so used to being on the radio where all you do is hear the audio. We're trying to do exactly what you're implying. Let's get the face out there. Let's get the hand movement. Let's get the animation out there. And it seems like it's more effective to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody has a voice, right? Unless you have a Mike Green or a Kevin Harlan or a Brent Musburger, pardon me. Those guys, those are the best voices of all time, right? Joe Rogan, Bruce, but the Buffer brothers. I mean, those are very specific, great voices. But unless you got that kind of voice, you're probably going to have a hard time differentiating yourself just based on a voice.
Yeah, Brent Musburger was my idol.
We go back a little ways to Vin Scully, Ernie Harwell, and Harry Carey. Right, Scott?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do. We definitely have a history there.
Kurt Dowdy, of course. And you're right. Unless you're gifted with a great voice, you do have to try to differentiate yourself. There's no question about it. And, Detroit's been spoiled that way, as you and I know, Scott, with guys like Ernie Harwell and George Kell and Bud Lynch and Van Patrick, our old announcers from way back when. We have had great voices, and it is an advantage to somebody. A guy I mentioned earlier, Scott, remember Eli Zaret?
Right.
What a distinct voice Eli Zaret had and still has. He's not dead yet, Al.
Well, it's funny, Graham. There's a guy that George and I are familiar with, that was in Hockey Night in Canada, but recently got kicked off, named Don Cherry. And now he's starting a podcast to realize how tough it's going to be, but he'll have people work with him to build it, But again, like George alluded to, you have these older people that either lost their job, said something they weren't supposed to, and they're trying to reinvent themselves through the podcast industry. So, they say, I hate to say, old voices never die, but this is an opportunity to rejuvenate their careers or revitalize them through the form of podcasting, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to do it. I think that video podcasting is a new craze. I don't know if you guys have ever listened to Joe Rogan, but Joe Rogan's a mediator. He's got a great voice. People love Joe Rogan because he gives everyone a platform. He's like Twitter in a person. Everybody has a platform, no matter what political side you're on. If you're crazy, if you're sane, he gives them all a platform. And he does it on video. So it makes it way easier to watch Joe Rogan talk to a guest on video because you get to see their hand. When someone does stuff with their hands, it tells a lot about their personality, right? Like, are they emotional or, how energetic are they? Boom, they're making nice hand gestures. You just get to see them face to face. When you see someone talking, everything makes more sense. It just clicks better.
Go ahead, George.
Well, I think that's true. It does make more sense, and it does make it more action-packed for the listener. I really think that, there is a point of no return on some of this stuff. I mean, we've got to understand that this still nothing beats being there live to see an event. What do you think the coronavirus, COVID-19, has meant to this whole world of communications as far as social media goes, Graham? Obviously, without fans being in the stands, it's very difficult, and for the average person to even get to a game anymore. So, the numbers, I bet, have been booming, right, since the pandemic struck.
I mean, yeah, I would say that more people, I don't have the statistics on it, but I would say more people are probably on social media tweeting about a game. I mean, if you take 15,000 people, 20,000 people out of a basketball arena, they're probably all sitting at home doing the same thing we are. So they're probably more likely to tweet about it. You got more people who don't have enough sports on, more people are probably gambling about it. Right? And that's also another huge aspect of sports websites nowadays. Everybody wants to know who you're picking in gambling, right? Like if 3 teams are playing that night, everybody wants to know who you're picking. Gambling used to be something in my eyes that was looked down upon, right? When someone's like, oh, he's gambling, like kind of people look down on it. Well, in the past 5 years, gambling has taken sports gambling at least, has taken a complete turn. Everybody loves sports gambling. Everybody wants in on the action. Everybody wants your picks. Everybody, that's another huge aspect is we have a gambling guy on one of our websites and we just let him, he posts articles with, 100 words and he just tells his picks for the week and people follow his picks. They tail his picks. They pick what he picks, right? It's a crazy thing, but it works.
So let's talk about hashtagging for a moment. Okay. Cause I know hashtags probably help you obtain followers, don't they? And what's an effective hashtag?
I think it's dependent on what your audience you're trying to reach. If you're using a Detroit Lions hashtag, Lions, NFL, whatever game's going on right now. If you're, whatever you're tweeting about, if you're posting an article about something, that's what's important is what you're hashtagging. There's no specific hashtag that's going to be the moneymaker per se, but it's a case by case situation or a tweet by tweet situation, right? So just whatever you're tweeting about, tag stuff or, the hashtag. I don't use a ton of hashtags. They do work, but no matter what you're tweeting about, if someone searches that on Twitter, it'll come up. So, all
right. So I got a bunch of questions. I'm going to give you rapid fire. Okay. You ready, Graham?
Go ahead.
What do you think makes for an informative sports podcast?
I think someone that has really good guests. I think someone to me, it's someone that has people on that lets their guests speak, that let people know that they're important, but their guests are why you're coming to listen to a podcast. Doesn't matter who it is, the most famous podcasters in the world, as much as you love them, you still want to listen because of their guests. Joe Rogan, I'm trying to think, I'm blanking out on other bigger podcasts right now, but Elon Musk, right? If Elon Musk goes on a Joe Rogan, everybody wants to listen. They're 2 of the most famous guys in the world, and they're conversing. Part of my take, one of the Barstool ones. Whenever they have a big guest, everybody wants to listen. That's a lot of my friend group still listens to them. And whenever they have a big guest, I'll be like, yo, you got to go listen. And I don't listen to a ton of podcasts anymore. I just don't necessarily have time because I'm working and calling all day. But when someone has a good guest and they let their guest speak or they have fun with their guests and they really interact, I think that's what makes a great podcast. I think you can be the best host and co-host of all time, but having good guests is so important because they help push your needle, right? They help promote and they help get your content out there.
Interesting. Okay, next question. Is 1 or 2 major sports own the edge over others as far as the content value or for listeners, such as pro football being a hotter topic than, say, Major League Baseball?
I would say that football and basketball, specifically college football, pro basketball, let me go in this order. NFL, college football, and NBA. Those are the top 3 right now. Those are what, that's all the craze. If you have a hot take, a free agency take, those are the 3 hottest on the market right now, and they probably will be for the next, 10 years.
All right, so you said NFL. What were the other 2?
NFL, college football, and NBA.
Really? Okay, that's interesting. And NBA, yeah. All right. So as far as regions in the country, do you think any regional segment is more a sports podcast mecca than, say, any other areas?
No, I don't think there's a specific area for podcasters. Obviously LA is huge for podcasters because everybody's always in LA if you're famous. But I don't think there's a specific, geographic location that makes you a better podcaster now.
Yeah, I would think that LA would be big. I'm a member of the Southern California Sports Broadcasters, and one of the things I'm trying to do is build my branch and brand out in LA because obviously you know how big of like I said, the number 2 sports market. Plus, it's connected with the entertainment business for sure. Don't you agree that LA is definitely a great place to get involved in if you can?
Yeah, I think LA is a great place to get involved in. I know right now it's kind of crazy because a lot of people are moving out of LA and moving across the country just because of tax purposes and stuff like that. But it's a great place to be. And I think, think about it. That's the hub where famous people go. Every famous person goes to LA. So it's easier to have famous people on your show and have them there in person if you're in Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, that's an area I plan to build. Another question, I think we may have touched on it, but I want to go over it again if I may. All right. Is podcasting the sports way if the future is opposed to radio or television or a sports talk show, or will there always be room for all types in your mind?
I think there's going to be room for every type of sports. I think sports radio, it's going to be hard for sports radio actually on the radio to survive. I just don't know how many people listen to the radio, and when the next generation kind of takes over, I think it'll be hard for radio to continue. I think podcasting, I think video podcasts, and recently I think, this guy named Duncan Trussell started a show. It's old podcast segments he made into a show. So he created an animated show from his old podcast with storylines and all kinds of things. So I think the future really is built on podcast episodes becoming television series. And that is obviously a lot more expensive to do, but I think that is going to be the future of podcasting.
That's interesting. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I just think it's very interesting. I mean, the future is just dynamic as far as social media and podcasting and that sort of thing. And I really think that most of the old school writers are adapting as best they can, but it's the new breed coming up, such as yourself, Graham, that are really going to carry the load and go forward with this because it's just a great area and a great field to get into. I really think that you've articulated it very well on our program tonight. You obviously have a very high knowledge level of this subject matter, and I know Scott and I are both thankful for that, Graham, for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to answer anything you guys want, and just thanks for having me on, and I get to tell my story right on y'all's awesome show. So
let me ask you this, okay?
I know that,
Graham, you've talked about how much you've done here. Do you have a book out there, or do you plan to write a book? Because I would think a guy like you, this should be very effortless, and I think this is a book anybody in their right mind would want to go ahead and buy. Heck, you know what? You get a book, I'd go out there and write you a check tomorrow, and then we'd go out to Greenville, South Carolina, which isn't very far from South Florida, by the way. We definitely go out to eat out there. Of course, not to say we won't at some point anyway, because I like to go up to the Carolinas. But have you thought about writing a book on this? This is just unbelievable.
I really haven't. I think it would be something I'm interested in. I've never, I was a sports writer, and I used to write, as weird as it sounds, when I was in 3rd and 4th grade, I used to write horror stories as a kid. That was my big thing, was horror stories. So I've written short stories and stuff like that, but I've never thought about writing a book. I think it would be certainly super interesting to do, and I think it is secondhand knowledge to me. I know it like the back of my hand, and I'd love to get it out there, and if I could make some money doing it, heck, why not?
You should. If Robert Redford's a natural, you're the closest thing I've got to that here on this broadcast, for God's sake. We'll call you Robert Redford the natural, and we'll call George and I the unnatural here, the old unnatural, can I have a senior drink at Wendy's kind of people? Because that's what we are. You're further away from that senior drink at Wendy's, man.
Speak for yourself, old man, Scott.
All right, I will. I guess I wouldn't want to put that in your mouth. I didn't know anything about Periscope live video streaming. Why don't you go into more detail about that? Now you got me curious.
Periscope?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me give you an example. Okay. And this is a personal example. When Zion Williamson, obviously, you know who Zion Williamson is, when he was committing in high school, I went and covered his announcement ceremony, and I Periscoped it. So it was kind of an obscure event, but I Periscoped it for the world to see, and I basically was like, put Zion Williamson commit video, Zion Williamson's committing video. That's just one specific instance of how it wasn't being broadcasted on a national network, but I was broadcasting, and I had like 10 or 11,000 viewers, and that's when I only had like 1,000 followers on Twitter. So people were retweeting it and finding it. But Periscope's also great for post-game reactions, to have a 10, 15-minute show, answer questions. It lets people interact with you while they're watching your face, right? So it's just, I think Periscope's a great way to gain interactions, to get more followers, to put yourself out there.
All right, so when we look at social media per se, I'm going to give you 4 of them, okay? And give me your opinion on every one of them, please. I'm heavy on LinkedIn. Of course, I need to, because not only that, it's a professional website where you meet a lot of people within your industry or wherever. So that's something that's really helped me a lot. When George Eichhorn was asking me, where do you get some of your guests? Well, at the beginning of the process, I relied strictly on LinkedIn because you have a common bond and you go from there. Facebook, I've been able to land guests on lately. I think it's been very useful. Twitter is how I was able to find you, which has been great. But haven't done a lot on Instagram. So why don't you break down every one of those to the best of your ability and tell people what you think is more effective? I know everything varies. I get that.
Well, I think if you can find someone on LinkedIn, it's a professional network, and I love LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn for work when I was looking for jobs. Like, I use LinkedIn all the time. I think and I know you won't have a problem with this because you've been in the industry, but putting yourself out there, people will have that fear of rejection. Like, I reach out to people all the time, and if they don't reply, like, what do I lose from that? What are you going to lose if someone doesn't reply? Who cares, right? You did what you had to do. You reached out. You did your job. So I love LinkedIn for that reason, because it's a great way to connect with people who you might not have a chance to otherwise. Twitter is probably my number 2. Is the easiest to connect with people because they're both platforms where you can message or talk to anybody, really. Twitter may be number 1 because you could just tweet somebody like, hey, could you please DM me? I have something to ask you. LinkedIn, probably number 2. I would say Facebook, maybe 3. Facebook's a little harder to get a hold of people. Maybe Instagram 3, but Instagram's still hard to DM because famous people don't check their DMs. You can certainly comment on their photo and ask, please DM me, or you can message them and ask to come on as a guest. Facebook is much harder because you have to be friends with someone to message them.
Right.
So I would say in that order, probably Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook.
All right, so Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and then Facebook.
Mm-hmm. But Facebook's great for interactions if you have a good group, and you post articles in a good website or a good group chat. Because we had a writer back in the day named Jackie. I can't remember his last name. He ended up working for Barstool, I believe. But he had Josh Gurley was his name, and he found these like forums to post his articles in about college football, and like he would get like 10 or 11,000 views in the first couple hours. I mean, he was breaking all kind of website records, and he just found this group that people would interact with his articles. And it's finding niches like that, like Reddit. Like, sometimes Reddit doesn't like self-promoting, and you can get in trouble for self-promoting. But Reddit's also a great place to get articles, or views on your articles. I mean, it just depends.
What's this called now? Reddit?
Reddit. Reddit. It's a much younger crowd, but Reddit's different. I don't even know how to explain Reddit, really, because it's just confusing. I don't use it a ton.
Right.
But it's a great place for interactions. But if they think you're self-promoting, they'll kick you off. But in the past, we've gotten a decent amount of page views from Reddit. So, yeah,
I've actually found out recently on LinkedIn that, not only have I gotten good guests, and that helped me get the guest thing going, but very rarely have I gotten one on Instagram. But Facebook, I'm getting more of them on. Twitter is really emerging as a good source, and I think that's interesting. But the thing I've actually done lately, and I can tell you right now that I enjoy joining different specialized groups, whether it's sports and PR, and joining groups on LinkedIn. Don't you find that joining a lot more groups on LinkedIn helps build your what you're trying to do, your repertoire, as they call it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, absolutely. In other words, you join groups on LinkedIn. You follow me? And then, so you're able to get into different groups and interact that way. So in other words, you could have old sports writers, or you can have this, and then PR people. They have a lot of groups. Are you familiar with those on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in a ton of groups on LinkedIn. I'm in like a MMA, UFC group that I'll just casually talk to other people in the business world about UFC cards sometimes, because
right.
UFC is still kind of a niche thing where it doesn't have a huge fan base. So when you find someone that can talk UFC with you, it's a lot more fun. So,
yeah, I guess, like I said, I'm waiting for you to write that book, and I'll be more than happy to write the forward for you. So no problem.
Yeah.
Anything you want me to do.
Well, come on. Yeah, give me a book contract, and I'll write it for you tomorrow.
I'll tell you what, I'm waiting to write one or two of mine. It's up, but the guy you're on here with has a book, and I'm actually in it. So, George, you have any other questions for Graham? He's certainly been helpful here and to us again.
No, I think he's covered it pretty well. I think it's like I said, a very growing area, dynamic involvement by so many people nowadays, and obviously he's touched on some really good points. And again, thank you for coming on our show again tonight, Graham.
Glad to come on. I really enjoyed kind of talking to you guys, and hopefully I could help you out with a little bit of information I gave you.
So Graham, do you have any other closing thoughts as we wrap up? Before you get off, you're going to promote yourself for sure. George will, and I will wrap it up. But any closing thoughts about how people? I know you've gone over a lot of details. How people can pick up followers on Twitter? Just a general rule of thought.
Yeah, search what you are interested in. Search a player's name. Search a game. Search your team's name. Find the people that are tweeting about what you're interested in or what you're talking about, and follow those people. Interact with those people. Don't be afraid to interact with random people. My biggest takeaway is, and this is one of my taglines, is anxiety kills creativity. Right? You have all these good ideas, but you're afraid what other people think. Don't ever be afraid of what other people think. Anxiety kills creativity. There's so many creative ideas in the world that just get blown away because people are afraid what they're going to think. They care about so much about what other people think. These beautiful ideas just get trashed, right? So my biggest thing is don't be afraid of what other people think, and just don't let anxiety kill creativity. Go do it. Don't be afraid of rejection.
So do you find sometimes a plain tweet with you just putting your opinion out there will get to enough people? And obviously you got to be careful what you say and put send, because they can screenshot it. Then they always say don't put send. But if you have certain things out there without even tagging anybody, how much of those actual tweets without anybody on there get to certain people out there? I'm just curious.
Well, my personal Twitter, I get at least 20 to 30 likes a tweet, but that's pretty standard for me. Sometimes 40, 50, and I've had a couple go viral, but that's just with opinion pieces, or I'm saying funny stuff, or, my big thing I always talk about is just I'm not a huge fan of the media because it kind of divides people, and people on Twitter are always at each other's throats, and I just don't like negativity. So I try to promote positivity as much as possible, if that makes sense. But
it makes a whole lot of sense. So, promoting positivity, I don't really like to go out there and negativity is the easiest way to get your run out there. I know something that just came to mind, okay? Thanks for bringing that up. Tom Brenneman recently lost his gig with the Reds. I know there was a basketball announcer with Sacramento that recently lost his. Do you find that some of these tweets can actually be career killers?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you're not saying anything offensive and you're just talking about sports, then, because not everybody you don't have to go make a political stand. Like, I don't talk politics on Twitter. I just talk sports and comedy. People when you immediately make a political stance, then you have people shying away, and, just stick to sports. Who cares? That's why I don't do politics on Twitter. I don't do politics in any of social media, because it just doesn't really matter to people who are who's there for sports, right? My Twitter is dedicated to sports. So why make it political? And I just think that sometimes you shouldn't say divisive things, or if people don't agree with you, there's no point in putting it out there. Right. If you have a hot take when it comes to sports, that's fine. But if you're a political website, then yeah, you should tweet politically. But if not, tweet about sports, talk about sports, get people talking about sports with you.
Yeah, so in other words, you're trying to say just find a niche that you're really enthusiastic and positive about that, put that out there, and pray that you're able to get more interest that way. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's correct.
Okay. Well, with that said, just so you know, you're listening to the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgenroth, along with George Eichhorn and Graham Farrell, who's been really unbelievable. And again, this broadcast will be heard on No Limits as well. With that said, Graham, why don't you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you? George will do the same thing, and I'll follow suit, and we will wrap up the show. So go ahead, Graham, let it all out there for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Connecting Sports Writers. That's the name. The @ is Connecting SW. Just at Connecting SW. And my personal Twitter is Graham Farrell. It's at Johnny Rambos, which was one of my pen names back in the day that I used to write under. So you can find me on Twitter, Graham Farrell. You can find me on LinkedIn, Graham Farrell. Find me on Instagram, Graham Farrell. On Facebook. You can also find my account, Connecting Sports Writers, like I said. go check it out. If you're a sports person, it's probably for you, and I think you'd enjoy it because it'll help you get some followers. So.
Well, yeah, news for you. I've learned an awful lot here in just the hour we've been doing this, and I'll be driving Graham crazy after 6 o'clock because obviously I'm looking forward to working with Graham on many occasions here. So with that said, George, why don't you let Graham know what you're about other than my longtime co-host that spans over 4 decades. Let him know the book you have out there and then some. Go ahead, George Acorn.
Yes, you can get a hold of me at DSBA2, that's David Sports Broadcasters Apple 2, on Twitter. Also get a hold of me on Yahoo, email obviously gicorn@yahoo.com. There's a link on the South Florida Tribune under my profile that you can link to order a copy of my book for about $22. You get your autographed copy of my book called Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air. I chronicle over 50 years of great sports broadcasting history in Detroit with Ernie Hartwell, Ray Lane, Paul Carey, Frank Beckman, George Blaha, Van Patrick, Bud Lynch, Bruce Martin, and Scott Morganroth. He's in the book too. He made the cover. No, you didn't make the cover. Sorry.
I don't care. Just getting in the book with all those people.
One whole page, Scotty.
What's that?
You got one whole page. You and Jimmy Connors and Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, that's it. That'll get you interested, Graham. We got to get Graham straightened out on the book side, though. So we'll think about it. One other thing that came to mind before we wrap up, okay, do you find that Facebook Live is a very effective way to generate followers in a lot of ways?
I do not, unless you have a decent amount of people on Facebook that you're friends with. I mean, it's just, or if it's public and you find a way to interact with people. I find Facebook's hard to interact with random people. Like I said earlier, Twitter is the best to interact with random people. So.
Okay, well, that's good to know. All right, now to give you our information, just so you know, Sports Exchange and No Limits is being heard on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If I've spoken too quick, give it to you another time. Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. To get a hold of us, you can go ahead and follow us at Tribune South. That's at Tribune South. Facebook, South Florida Tribune. Feel free to follow us there. We'll give you updates on programming, stories, and whatnot. Instagram, we have a page, South Florida Tribune. YouTube channel, South Florida Tribune. And, we might actually have to consider having Graham Farrell, George, on a future broadcast, doing it with Zoom. If he's open to the idea, we can all do it visually the next time. How would you like that, Graham?
Yeah, I'd love to show my face. I've shown it on Twitter for years. I've done all kinds of videos and things like that. So any chance I can get to do it, I'm glad to help, Scott.
Well, we're glad. And a few other pieces of information, you can get a hold of us at www.southfloridatribune.com. You'll find a lot of our media distribution partners on there. Columnists and these broadcasts can be found there as well. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And on LinkedIn, you can connect with me, Scott Morganroth, as well. So any closing thoughts by my two co-hosts tonight? Graham, what do you want to say to wrap her up?
Nothing. I'm just glad you had me on. And, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Or if you would like any social media advice, feel free to reach out to Connecting Sports Writers. My DMs are always open, so feel free to message me if you need any advice. I'm glad to help.
Well, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind calling you once in a while either, if that's okay with you after 6 o'clock, if you're okay with that.
That is perfectly fine, Scott.
And George, anything you want to wrap it up with?
No, I'm just telling you the Detroit Tigers are for real. We're only 2 games. They are only 3 games out of the last playoff spot. So Tiger baseball is back, and it's a fun time in Motor City as we finally have a contender as we turn the page to the month of September.
Well, all I can tell you is August 31st ended on a great note, and I'll give you 2 reasons why it did. Graham Farrell and George Acorn. So really enjoyed this broadcast immensely, and I'm looking forward to us doing another one. So meanwhile, on behalf of Graham Farrell and George Acorn, my name is Scott Morganroth of Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us tonight. Good night, everybody.